I still remember the sound of my mother's voice that night, thin, shaky, terrified, as she asked me why my sister was crying on the kitchen floor. I didn't understand. I hadn't even seen her that evening. But within minutes, before I had a chance to breathe or speak or exist, she pointed at me with trembling fingers and accused me of doing something so vile it hollowed out my chest. My father didn't ask a question, he just stepped back like I was radioactive. By morning, half the family wouldn't look at me. By the end of the week, I was sleeping in my car because no one wanted the accused under their roof. But the part that shattered me wasn't the accusation, it was that she let it happen. And the night I walked out of my parents' house for the last time, I made myself a quiet promise. One day, the truth will drag itself into the light, and I'll be there to watch it burn. Before we continue the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I love seeing where my stories reach around the world. I came home later than usual that night, tired, hungry, still half ironing out the day in my head. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you slow down without knowing why. My parents were in the living room, sitting oddly straight, like they'd been rehearsing something. My mother's eyes were red but dry, the way they get when she's cried herself past exhaustion. My father wouldn't even look at me, he just kept rubbing the bridge of his nose like he was bracing for impact. I hadn't even taken my shoes off when my sister stepped into the hallway. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stood there, arms crossed over her chest, breath shaky. Then, without warning, she said I did something to her. Something that made the world tilt under my feet. I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because it was so impossibly wrong my brain couldn't process it. But when I saw my mother flinch at the sound of my voice, the laugh died in my throat. My father finally looked up at me, and there was no confusion in his eyes, just judgment, already made. Every word I tried to say felt like it hit an invisible wall. They didn't want answers. They wanted a villain. And apparently, I was convenient. I remember the last thing I said before I walked out of that house. Whatever this is, whoever is behind it, I'll find out. And when I do, none of you will ever forget it. I barely slept that night. I sat in my car outside a 24-hour laundromat, engine off, jacket pulled tight against the cold. My phone buzzed a few times, calls from numbers I recognized but didn't want to hear from. I didn't pick up. I didn't owe anyone explanations, not after the way they looked at me. Around 6 a.m., I finally drove home. Not because I thought things would be better, but because I needed clothes, documents, anything that proved I still existed outside the lie that had swallowed me overnight. I didn't even make it to the front steps. A police cruiser rolled slow up the street, then stopped directly behind my car. The lights weren't on yet, but the message was clear. 2 officers stepped out, one older, one younger, both wearing the same cautious, preloaded expression I'd come to recognize too well. "Are you your name?" the older one asked. My stomach dropped. "Yeah." "We need you to come with us. There's been an allegation." That word. The same one that had ripped my family apart less than 12 hours earlier. My throat closed, but I forced myself to stay still, controlled. Neighbors' curtains twitched. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Someone paused their morning jog, pretending to stretch while staring directly at me. It was surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. My father came out onto the porch, not rushing, not panicked, just watching. And when his eyes met mine, there was no fight in them. No question, no doubt. Just the quiet, resigned acceptance that his son was exactly what he'd been told. I said nothing as the cuffs clicked around my wrists. I didn't resist. I didn't plead. I just stared at the ground and felt something inside me shut down, clean and final. Because in that moment, one thing became brutally clear. If my own blood could watch me being taken away without lifting a finger, then I had no family left to lose. The charges didn't stick, not that anyone celebrated. The officers questioned me for hours, asked the same things in slightly different ways, watching for cracks that weren't there. Eventually, they let me go with a paper in my hand and suspicion still hanging over me like a smell I couldn't wash off. I walked out of the station knowing one thing: my name was already damaged beyond repair. When I got back to the house, my parents had packed a suitcase for me and left it by the door. Not neatly, not lovingly, just shoved together, half-zipped, as if touching my clothes too long might contaminate them. My mother stood behind the couch, arms folded so tight it looked like she was holding herself together. My father kept pacing, muttering something about needing space and things being too heated. Neither could look at me long enough to form a complete sentence. My sister stayed in her room. Door locked. Lights off. Not a word. Not a sound. It was like I didn't exist, or worse, like I existed too much. My father finally said, "You should stay somewhere else for a while. Until this settles." This. I repeated. This, meaning the lie she told? He flinched, just barely. And that tiny reaction told me everything. He didn't believe me. Not fully. Not enough to fight for me. I picked up the suitcase. I didn't argue. What was the point? They'd already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. As I stepped outside, the air felt colder than it should have. Neighbors watched from windows. Someone whispered my name, not kindly. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and that sound hit harder than anything said inside. It wasn't just a house I was leaving. It was the life I'd built, the identity I thought was solid, the family I'd trusted to know me. And as I walked down the driveway with everything I owned jammed into a single suitcase, one truth dug itself deep into my chest. If I wanted justice, I'd have to earn it alone. It took months before I could think straight again. I worked whatever jobs I could find, slept on a friend's couch until I wore out my welcome, then rented a room that smelled like damp carpets and old cigarettes. I kept my head down. I stayed quiet. I tried to rebuild, but the accusation followed me everywhere, like a stain only I could see. The strangest part was my sister's silence. She didn't reach out once. Not a message. Not a slip of guilt. Nothing. It was as if she'd erased me from her life the moment she opened her mouth. But one night, scrolling through social media because loneliness hits hardest after midnight, something caught my eye. A photo. Smiling too wide, shoulders too tense, standing next to her boyfriend, the same guy who used to glare at me when he thought I wasn't looking. The same guy who always tried to insert himself between us during family gatherings, like he needed to control the air she breathed. Suddenly, something clicked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, sinister snap somewhere in the back of my mind. I replayed every conversation I'd had with him, the fake politeness, the way he cut her off mid-sentence, the way she'd shrink whenever he raised his voice. I remembered a time I confronted him about how he talked to her, and how his expression changed, like someone had challenged him in a language he didn't expect me to speak. And now she was accusing me of something that would wipe me off the chessboard completely. It didn't feel like her words. It felt like his hands, his pressure, his fingerprints all over the lie. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces aligned, crooked, ugly, undeniable. Someone wanted me gone. Someone who saw me as a threat. Someone who needed her isolated. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was a direction, the first one I'd had since the world turned on me. And for the first time in months, I felt something sharper than grief. Something cleaner. Something with teeth. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Years have a way of sanding you down until you barely recognize the shape you used to be. I kept moving, job to job, apartment to apartment, drifting through my 20s like a ghost wearing my face. I wasn't living. I was surviving in slow motion. Birthdays passed without calls. Holidays came and went without an empty seat left for me at the table. I watched my family's lives unfold from the sidelines like I was scrolling through strangers' updates. Smiling photos. Celebrations. My sister posting pictures with her boyfriend, the man I was increasingly certain had puppeteered the lie that destroyed me. They looked happy. But it wasn't real happiness. It was brittle, like a photograph that bends too easily. Her smile never reached her eyes. His arm was always wrapped around her in a way that looked more like possession than affection. Despite everything, some small, stupid part of me hoped someone, anyone, in my family would reach out. An apology. A question. A flicker of doubt. But the silence was total. They'd chosen the version of me that scared them, the version that justified pushing me out of their world. One night, sitting in my tiny kitchen with a bowl of cheap noodles, I finally accepted it. They weren't waiting for the truth. They weren't hoping for reconciliation. They had built a life where I didn't exist, and they were comfortable in it. And that realization didn't break me the way the accusation had. It hardened me. Because if they could erase me that easily, then when the truth finally came out, it would hit them like a wrecking ball. And I'd make damn sure I was standing there to watch the impact. Justice wasn't going to find me. I'd have to carve it out myself, piece by piece, until every lie was dragged into daylight. It was a Thursday night, late, the kind of late where even the city noises thin out and you can hear your own breathing too clearly. I was lying on my couch, half watching some forgettable show when my phone buzzed with a notification. A message request. From a name I hadn't seen in years. Her friend. One of the few people who used to joke with me at family gatherings back before everything curdled. We hadn't spoken since the accusation. She disappeared with the rest of them. My first instinct was to ignore it. I didn't need another ghost resurfacing to poke at old wounds. But something in my chest wouldn't let me swipe it away. I opened it. Her first line stopped me cold. I don't know if you'll even read this, but something's wrong with her. I sat up. She went on typing in short, tense bursts, telling me things I didn't expect, things I wasn't prepared for. My sister had grown distant, withdrawn, nervous around her boyfriend. She'd flinch at loud sounds. She'd stopped meeting friends, stopped going out, stopped being the version of herself I remembered. Then came the line that made my skin go hot and cold at the same time. I think he's hurting her. And I think he made her say things she didn't want to. I didn't move for a long time. I just stared at the words, feeling something shift inside me, a sensation like a door unlocking in a dark hallway I'd forgotten existed. Her friend said she'd tried reaching out, tried pushing my sister to confide in someone, anyone, but the boyfriend monitored everything. Calls, messages, even her social media. She said the control was suffocating, obvious to anyone paying attention. Then she wrote, "I don't know what he made her accuse you of, but I don't believe it anymore." I didn't realize I was gripping my phone hard enough to make my knuckles ache. That message didn't clear my name. It didn't rewrite the damage. But it was the first crack in their perfect facade, the first sign that the truth wasn't buried as deep as he wanted. I typed back one sentence. "Tell me everything you know." Because the moment someone else saw the same shadows I had, I knew the story was shifting. And I wasn't going to let it shift without me. Her friend didn't hold back. Once the first message broke the dam, everything came pouring through, screenshots, timestamps, stories that made my stomach twist in ways I hadn't felt since the night my world collapsed. She told me how my sister had changed slowly at first, canceling plans, losing weight, dropping out of group chats, then all at once. She stopped speaking unless spoken to. She apologized constantly, even for things that weren't her fault. She flinched when people walked too quickly toward her. And that boyfriend of hers? He'd become the center of her universe, not because she loved him, but because she was afraid of what would happen if she didn't. Control disguised as concern. Possession disguised as protection. Fear disguised as loyalty. But then came the part that hit me hardest. There had been a night, about a year before the accusation, when my sister had confided in her friend. She said her boyfriend hated how close we were, hated that she'd tell me things she didn't tell him, hated that I influenced her. He called me names behind her back, insisted I was interfering, argued with her whenever I visited the house. And then, one night after an argument, he said something chilling. "Your family trusts him too much. All it takes is one moment, one story, and they wouldn't even look at him the same again." Her friend remembered it word for word. I sat there staring at my phone, pulse thudding in my ears. It wasn't proof, but it was intent. Malice. A blueprint for the exact nightmare he eventually built around me. Her friend went on. She said my sister once tried leaving him quietly, secretly, but he found out. There were bruises the next time she saw her. Small ones. Hidden ones. The kind you only notice if you're really looking. By the time she typed, "She's scared of him." I know it, my jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. The cracks in their story weren't cracks anymore. They were fractures, long, splintered and impossible to ignore. And through those fractures, the truth was beginning to leak out like a slow, inevitable flood. When her friend finally asked, "What do you want to do?" I stared at the question for a long moment. Did I want? I wanted every lie dismantled. Every whisper exposed. Every smug look wiped off his face. Every ounce of power he held stripped from him until he was nothing but the coward he'd always been. But more than anything, I wanted my sister back. Not the version he built, the version he broke, but the one he'd stolen from us all. So I wrote back. I want the truth. And I'm not stopping until I get it. I didn't expect the truth to arrive neatly. I thought it would come in fragments, rumors, hesitations, little ruptures that eventually formed a picture. But life rarely respects pacing. Sometimes it drops everything on you at once. The moment came 3 years after her friend first messaged me. I was at work, a warehouse shift I took because it paid under the table and didn't require a background check. My phone buzzed in my pocket during a break. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to look. A text from her friend. "It's happening. She finally filed a report." I froze. Then another message. About him. My hands went cold. My chest went tight. I stepped outside, the afternoon sun too bright, the world too normal for what I was reading. She told me my sister had cracked, completely, finally, after years of surviving in silence. He'd gone too far. There were witnesses this time. A neighbor heard shouting, heard something breaking, heard her crying. Police were called. Evidence was collected. It wasn't my name on the report. It was his. Her friend said my sister was terrified, shaking, barely able to speak. But when the officers asked if there had ever been a pattern, if he'd ever pressured her into lying, covering for him, obeying him, she broke down. And for the first time, she told someone the truth. That he isolated her, threatened her, manipulated her, controlled her, and yes, forced her to accuse someone else of something she never wanted to say. Someone he viewed as a threat. Someone he hated. Someone he wanted gone. Me. I didn't realize tears were rolling down my face until they hit the screen. Not from sadness, from something sharper, something that had been buried under years of numbness. Her friend ended with, "There's going to be a hearing. You need to be there." Walking into that courthouse felt surreal. The hallway smelled of old paper and disinfectant. The kind of scent that clings to every miserable story that's ever been dragged through those doors. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was steady, clearer than it had been in years. When I reached the courtroom and saw my sister sitting beside her lawyer, eyes swollen, hands trembling, something inside me cracked open. Not forgiveness, not even close, but recognition. She wasn't the girl who'd pointed at me years ago. She was someone shattered. The bailiff called the defendant's name. Her boyfriend walked in, chin high, arrogance dripping off him like cologne. But when he saw me sitting there, alive, composed, unbroken, something flickered in his expression. A crack. Small, but real. And in that moment, standing on opposite sides of the room, we both knew his story was about to collapse. And mine was only just beginning to rise from the wreckage. I used to think courtrooms were built for justice. They're not. They're built for exposure, every secret dragged out under fluorescent lights, every lie forced to stand naked in a room full of strangers. And on that day, it was his turn to be stripped down. He looked different up close. Not as tall. Not as sure of himself. His confidence was still there, that smug, practiced arrogance, but it flickered at the edges, like a flame fighting a draft. He kept glancing at my sister, probably searching for the submission he'd spent years conditioning into her. But she wouldn't look at him. When the questioning began, he tried to maintain control, correcting the prosecutor, smirking at the judge's warnings, insisting everyone was misinterpreting things. Textbook abuser behavior. He wasn't defending himself, he was performing. But then they presented the evidence. Photos. Recordings. Testimony from neighbors. Medical reports. A pattern even he couldn't talk his way around. His smirk slipped. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The prosecutor asked him directly if he had ever manipulated my sister into lying about someone else, someone in her family. The room went silent. It felt like the air itself tightened. My heart hammered, but my face stayed still. He hesitated not long, but enough for everyone to see. Then he tried to deflect. Then he tried to blame her. Then he tried to blame stress. Then he tried to blame miscommunication. Each excuse dug him deeper. Finally, cornered by his own words, trapped by evidence he couldn't twist, he snapped. Not in anger. In panic. He muttered something, barely above a whisper. The judge made him repeat it louder. And he did. I told her to say it. I made her. I didn't think it would go this far. There it was. Not an apology. Not remorse. Just fear, raw, pathetic fear, spilling out after years of him thinking he was untouchable. For a moment, everything in me went still. Not vindicated. Not relieved. Just still. The courtroom erupted, lawyers talking over each other, the judge demanding order, spectators whispering like wildfire. But all I could look at was my sister. She was staring at her lap, shoulders shaking. No tears. No words. Just small, broken movements that said everything she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. I didn't go to her. Not yet. Some distances can't be crossed in a single breath. But she finally looked up, not at him, not at the judge. At me. Her lips parted just slightly, like she wanted to speak. She didn't. But she didn't have to. Her silence, for the first time, wasn't an accusation, it was acknowledgement. And his confession, echoing through that courtroom, was just the beginning of what was coming next. The confession should have felt like the end, like the weight pressing on my chest for years had finally cracked and fallen away. But justice doesn't arrive clean. It arrives in echoes and consequences, in the slow dismantling of the person who thought they could destroy you and walk away untouched. And I was going to watch every second of it. After the confession, everything moved fast. His lawyer tried to backpedal, claiming emotional distress, confusion, anything to dull the blade he'd plunged into his own case. But the judge wasn't buying it. Neither was the DA. A new set of charges dropped on him like a hammer: coercion, witness tampering, intimidation, domestic assault. Each one perfectly deserved. Each one sharpened by the years he'd spent hiding behind my sister's fear. They took him into custody right there. No bail. No second chances. No charm left to weaponize. As the deputies cuffed him, he twisted around to look at me. And for the first time there was nothing in his eyes, no control, no swagger, no superiority. Just the realization that he'd lost. Completely. Publicly. Permanently. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see my face as he fell. After they dragged him out, the room slowly emptied, leaving quiet pockets of people gathering their papers and whispering in subdued tones. My sister stayed seated, hands in her lap, staring at the table like it held the sum of everything she'd ruined and everything she'd endured. I walked toward her. Not fast. Not with anger. Just steady steps, the kind you take when you know the past can't be undone, but the truth finally stands on your side. She didn't look up until I was right in front of her. Her voice came out cracked, barely a breath. "I'm sorry." It wasn't enough. Not for the years I lost. Not for the nights I slept in cars, the jobs I couldn't keep, the way my own parents recoiled from me. But it was the first real thing she'd said in years. "I know," I answered. Cold, but honest. She nodded, tears finally sliding down her cheeks. And I let her cry, not out of sympathy, not out of forgiveness, but because she needed to face the truth she helped create. As I walked out of the courthouse, sunlight hit me like I'd stepped into a different world. A world where my name wasn't poisoned. A world where the lie had finally collapsed louder than the accusation. My parents tried calling later. Apologies, explanations, regrets, all too little, too late. I let the calls ring out. Let the messages pile up. Let the guilt do its work. Justice isn't always a verdict. Sometimes it's absence, the space you leave behind in the lives of the people who discarded you. He went to prison. She went to therapy. My family went into denial. And me. I rebuilt not from forgiveness, but from fire. Because after everything they did, everything they allowed, everything they believed, I owed them nothing. Not anymore.